So there's the season of playing and there is the season of recruiting. And as one finishes, the other one starts to really heat up. Welcome to the marketplace for the first time as we get stuck into free agency. Yes, there are still a couple of rounds still to go, but the conversations are happening thick and fast and there are moves going on and we're going to keep you right across it during this free agency period. I'm Jack Heverin. I've got a panel assembled alongside me who have got all the information, all the analysis and all the opinions that you need to know during this free agency period. I start, of course, with the best newsbreaker in Australian basketball, Olgun Uluc from ESPN. This is like your grand final time, Olgun.
It's fun. It's not just now. It's not just like free agency is coming up, so we're locked in. This is stuff that's happening even before this season begins. Teams are thinking 1, 2, 3 years ahead. So this is really fun. This is where it all comes to a head. But don't get it twisted. All of this stuff is years and months in the making.
Pete Hooley pours himself over all of these depth charts, over all of these contract situations. Pete, you know everything back to front. There's a lot of teams with a lot of gaps.
There is, exactly. We're going to go through all the teams. And the big key names out there that have been linked to the NBL in recent years and maybe they haven't found themselves back here or here at all, they start to pop up. But Olgun's point is true, where teams not just thinking about the next year. They're not just thinking about NBL 26 this season. It's okay, who's off contract maybe in 2 years down the track where we could get someone to fill that gap and then go after that person. That's happening again this year, as Olgun said, where there's teams who would now see some potential free agents that if nothing gets extended there, well, that's what we planned for 3 years ago. We planned for that guy to be available. We're going to go get him.
And Derek Rucker, you've spent a lot of time looking at some of the big decisions that teams have got to make in the next little while.
Well, I love seeing how teams put it all together. I like to see the chemistry, who goes after superstars, the philosophy of each team and how they feel like they can increase their chances of success. And obviously, can you build a team that can defend? We always talk about it, and so often in the recruiting and in the establishment of your team, I think often it's forgotten about when we know defense wins championships.
So episode number 1, we'll take a look at a few of the teams, but we'll talk about some of the big names to watch, not only here in the NBL, but for those who are overseas at the moment who we'd love to see back playing in the league. In episode 2 tomorrow, we'll take a look at the remainder of our teams, a couple of coaching situations, and we'll talk about some of the big college names to watch as well. But let's dive straight into the biggest issue right now. Hands down, the Bryce Cotton situation is the biggest one that we've got during free agency, not only for the Wildcats, but because there'll be some teams who would love to try and get a bid together to get Bryce Cotton, but then there'll be other teams watching that situation to work out what they're going to do.
Yeah, so let's frame it from where the talks began, right? It was earlier in the season where Bryce Cotton met with Mark Arena, the owner, Danny Mills, the GM, and they put an offer on the table to Bryce and his management. No offer was accepted. And so this is why this has dragged out for so long, and it's been the big question throughout the entire season of, is this Bryce's last season in the NBL or with the Perth Wildcats? Now, as it stands right now, I think we all have our opinion on what we think will happen. No one knows for sure. As it stands right now, my feel is that we more than likely will not see Bryce Cotton back in the league next season. That's what it feels like. Obviously, the money in Japan is something that is very substantial. We've spoken about Trevor Gleeson as the head coach of the Chiba Jets. All of those things coming together makes us feel like Bryce Cotton more than likely won't be back. I will never say never, right? He is based in Perth. He lives in Perth. But it feels like the money elsewhere and the opportunity elsewhere might be too much for him to turn down.
It seems like that might be the case. And again, we look at what Bryce Cotton's achieved and what he's worth right now, and that makes sense. And a lot of people will sit there, even Perth fans understanding, if you're worth this amount and you're getting offered this amount, of course you have to go and take that if it's in Japan. We know the Perth Wildcats went to Japan in the pre-season.
The worst decision they could ever have.
which is interesting. You kind of put him on a silver platter.
Why are you going to Japan?
Put him there and just say, hey.
Would you like to have a look at this?
Exactly.
So that's interesting. And again, we've talked about this ever since we've started talking about him being a free agent and teams circling just to see what happens, all right? Teams who would be getting together with the ownership, with management thinking, do we have enough to have a bid for him if he becomes a free agent? Because when this happened, this was 3 months ago, we all thought, okay, the extension's been offered, he hasn't signed it. There's still been the potential that he could have signed in this last 3 months, which then teams would have gone the other way. They're still monitoring to see what happens. And as Olgun alluded to, it looks like it's going down the path of not being the case. So teams that we know have thought about, okay, do we have enough money? Do we put all our eggs in this basket? It's going to be a fascinating watch.
Well, it raises a question of what can the league do from a macro perspective to ensure we don't lose players of Bryce's caliber? because this is an all-time great who we may not be able to see fulfill and show the longevity in his NBL career. I joked with Andrew Gaze the other day that we may need to rename the MVP trophy. But Bryce is going to get his 5th trophy. He's still well in his prime. He could rack up 7 or 8 MVPs if he was able to stay here. Now you talk about not only an NBL legend, but you talk about an all-time great in Australian sport.
Well, this is the question. It's easy for us to say because I don't think any of us are on that sort of money. So the money is one thing, but then the legacy is the other. How big of a factor do we think this could be?
I spoke about the legacy, I guess, in the last few weeks since it's all been brought up and you're talking about the money side of it. But Bryce got a great point, and this is a guy who was in Huddle last year when he sat down. He said he's got things on his mirror that he's continuing to cross off, but he doesn't want to tell anybody else what it is. But he adds another MVP to his list now, 5. It probably should already be 6. And then what he could potentially achieve. You know he wants to win championships too, so that adds to it. But for the longest time, we thought that everything that Gaze achieved would never be close to anyone getting close to that kind of trophy cabinet. But at the age that he is, what he's producing this year, to be able to continue to do that, if we revisited this in 3 years' time, it could be a staggering conversation.
Pete, there's an argument to be made that this is his greatest season. And if that's the case, well, you would figure his decline is going to happen over the next 6 to 7 years. And even if he was 10% less of what he's done this season, he's still probably the MVP. And I don't know what Perth do to ensure that he stays there. Is there any else that they can provide him, Olgun, other than money to help their case?
There was a clear sticking point in the process of the Perth Wildcats this season, and it was re-signing John Riley to that 3-year deal. Right around that point, the whispers began to grow even louder that maybe Bryce might go and look elsewhere. Again, we've spoken, I think, ad nauseum about the fact that his relationship with John Riley is purely professional, and that's totally fine. But if you're Bryce Cotton and JR is there on a 3-year deal, I think we then maybe understate the amount of money that exists in Japan. It is an amount of money that is life-changing for a young family like what Bryce has. The other thing that's worth noting is the comments that Mark Arena made to the media shortly after it began to trickle out that we're keeping an eye on Bryce Cotton's contract situation, where he projected the idea that we're going to pay Bryce the most amount of money that anyone's ever been offered. From what I understand, I don't think that sat well with Bryce. The fact that was what was being projected to the media and to the public. So all of that matters. I wouldn't say that money is like the driving factor for Bryce Cotton. I'd say it's not a non-factor though. And again, for someone with a young family, I imagine getting that amount of money from, let's say, Japan is enough of an inducement to go there as opposed to fulfilling a legacy, which seems pretty locked up already.
So are the two options Perth or Asian money, or is there a chance that another NBL team could come here with a knockout blow?
I wouldn't completely rule out another NBL team. I say that the options are limited. From what I understand, there are only certain coaches who Bryce would want to play for.
Sure.
He's in that really privileged opportunity where he can basically pick where he goes. And that's a really cool place to be in. And so out of the teams that I think have a coach that Bryce, I think, would appreciate playing for and would have the opportunity, Melbourne's probably the only one that has an opening. And that all comes down to what Matthew Dellavedova does as well. I think Bryce has an appreciation and respect for someone like Dean Vickham and someone like Scott Roth as well. Whether Tasmania can front up that sort of money is a different question. And then it's up to those teams. We've seen the Perth Wildcats over the past few seasons. They're hitting almost that 4 million mark in their cash spend. That's a really, really high number. And you almost have to do that with Bryce Cotton because of how much money you're paying him and the fact that there are no things within the cap system that you can do to marquee that number. You have to pay that entire thing on the cap. There are no mechanisms to lower that on your cap hit. And so you know that when you're buying into Bryce Cotton, you're buying into a substantial cash spend and a substantial luxury tax.
Pete, let me just say one thing. And you're a romantic, you're an idealist like me with basketball. I would hate to see Bryce in the NBL, but not in a Perth uniform.
It'd be weird. It'd be really weird, wouldn't it? Because we've just known him as a Perth Wildcats legend. The one thing on all of the Bryce conversations, I've been very impressed with the way he's gone about it this season.
Agree.
When you are the biggest name we've had in a very long time, and it's constantly there week in and week out, and he's just been professional saying, I'm dealing with that at the end of the season because I just want to focus on winning, which we know he does, winning. And as you said, probably having his best season to date. So be able to do that and rise above it. Whatever comes next, if it's Japan, if it's another team, it's been a privilege to be able to sit back and watch what he's done, and he's well-deserving whatever it is. Selfishly, we all want him here in the NBL, but whatever it is, it's going to be completely well-deserved, and it's going to be a big one to watch.
I'll make it clear that it's unlikely that he's in another NBL jersey. The safe money is on him if he's not with the Perth Wildcats, that he's somewhere overseas.
I feel like the Red Army would vomit if they saw Bryce Cotton wearing a Melbourne United jersey, to be honest, but you never know. We mentioned that he's the biggest name, and as Olgun and the boys explain here, not just because of what it means for Perth, but what it means for other teams as well. There are so many names to choose from. We've all gone away and had a look at one big name each that we think is a story to watch during this free agency period. Derek, you're first.
The Illawarra Hawks and their lead import, Trey Kell. This is a guy, Jack, who I love the way he's played. I've always enjoyed and respected his game, even in his first 2 seasons in the competition with Southeast Melbourne and then with Adelaide. I thought he was underappreciated, undervalued, and the fact that he wasn't able to perform at a high level consistently was only about injuries and his health. And we've seen this year, even though he still shows moments of injuries and complaints and things like that, but by and large this season, he has been a dominant player. I've got him as a top 5 player in the competition. He shoots the ball well. He's a fantastic lead guard. Because of his size, he automatically gives the Illawarra Hawks a physical advantage out there on the floor. He rebounds well. He has a sense for the moment. I think this is one where the Hawks got to get it done almost immediately and lock him up for 2 years.
I'm with you on that. I think that the situation in Illawarra is what's helping him thrive as well. Him alongside, it's no surprise, no coincidence that Tyler Harvey's having his most efficient and damaging season either. What they can produce in the backcourt, but again, the overarching reason for that is Justin Tatum. What he's managed to do, and again, their team makeup, that kind of equal opportunity offense, but the way they play, it just fits Trey Kell to a T. Well, yeah, he's the point guard, but there's a lot of the time where even if Sam Froling gets off the rim, he's pushing it, Days has been pushing it, Pete Ling, anyone. So he kind of fits this unique aspect of game style that the Hawks have, but I'm being able to pair them potentially for the next couple of years, knowing, and we'll talk about the Hawks, that Tyler Harvey is going to be an Aussie at some point. That can be exciting.
But you know, the other thing about Trey Kell is his personality is a little bit different than, say, a Bryce Cotton or a Parker Jackson Cartwright. He's not a domineering alpha. He has moments of alpha. But it kind of suits what the Hawks try and do as a team because Harvey has moments of alpha. Froling has a bit of that. So within that framework, I think Trey Kell is a masterpiece.
The backcourt has been really effective, those two playing alongside each other. Tyler Harvey's contracted for the next 2 seasons. I'm told that the Hawks have begun preliminary talks with Trey Kell's agent with regard to a potential new deal. So I think that's important to note as well. They've done the same with Sam Froling, and so they're trying to keep this together because I think they see Justin Tatum as someone who is doing a really good job of unlocking the skill sets of these guys, keeping them within a structure, but also giving them some freedom to let them sort of be themselves. I think that's been a really good thing for Trey Kell, for Tyler Harvey, for everyone on that team.
Halls, you're up next. Who's your big name to watch?
I mean, if we talked about Bryce Cotton, then we've got to talk about Kendric Davis because Kendric Davis has been unbelievable. And the more we talk about it each week, right, and we keep bringing up his first-year stats, and I went back to look at the first-year import stats that we've had in recent times, the memories, the Casper Wares, the Jerome Randalls, the Bryce Cotton's first year when he was fantastic. Jalen Adams won an MVP at the numbers, and Kendric Davis's numbers are off the charts. Now, we've reported, I mean, we know that Adelaide would like to keep him long term, and it's one that we're going to have to watch closely because second-year pro producing this in the first year in the NBL where we see a lot of imports come, and it takes them a while to figure the league out. It took them a little while to figure out everything happened on the team, but one thing that's been consistent is this man's averaging 25.5 points, leading the league with 8 assists per game. And the numbers are staggering, right?
And in that Sydney Kings game last week, I thought there was no one on the floor that had a remote chance of being able to guard him. They put Bull Quall on, they put McQuatch Malawatch. None of those guys can guard Kendric. And that leads me to this conclusion is he is unguardable. And if you have an unguardable guy like Kendric Davis, you've got to bring him back. Now, we know we've seen throughout the course of this season some moments that haven't been entirely flattering from Kendric. I'm willing to give him a pass in that regard because he is still a young man learning how to navigate through life and basketball. And Matty Weston has shown that he's willing to take risks. Look at the composition of that team. There are some very strong personalities and volatile characters in that crew, but they're making it work as we come down the stretch run.
And Olgun, I wonder if Kendric Davis is the sort of guy that is better for the experience. As Pete said, he's only 25. Is he better for the experience of having played over the other side of the world, played in this league? If he comes back next year, none of this is new to him now.
So Kendric Davis didn't have a passport before he got to Australia. I don't believe he'd ever left the United States of America. And so this is someone who the Adelaide 36ers knew was coming in as a young player, as a young professional, like you said, a young man who was having his first experience outside of the United States. And so there was an expectations of some hiccups, but outside of like a few moments, he has been everything that they hoped he would be. From an offensive standpoint, he's a special offensive player. You mentioned Jalen Adams. It feels like that Jalen Adams year where Jalen Adams won MVP over Bryce Cotton. Now, it would probably take a lot for Kendric Davis to overtake Bryce Cotton's special year, but the fact that it's even a conversation is a really impressive thing. Now, I know that they want to keep him long term, and the fact that we now see what he does in the NBL, we know what he's about. You can build around that now. They have Isaac Humphries contracted, they have Dejan Vasiljevic contracted. You now have the crux of a team that you can build around, as opposed to Kendric Davis coming in and he's still sort of an unknown. You know what he is now. They want to lock him in on a multi-year deal.
We'll get to the Adelaide 36ers in the second episode of The Marketplace, but we're talking the big names at the moment to watch during this period. Olgun, your name, when it came through on the WhatsApp, might have surprised a couple of us. Why?
Matthew Dellavedova.
Oh.
So he's off contract with Melbourne United. And from what I understand, he is seeking a multi-year deal, a considerable amount of money. And it's Matthew Dellavedova, what he brings on court from an effectiveness standpoint, off court, just from a pure fame standpoint, who he is. Like he will fill arenas. He's someone who helps your team. But he's not contracted. And from what I understand, I think United is a tiny bit hesitant to lock in Delly on such a long-term deal for the amount of money that I'm told he's asking for. Now, he wants this deal through to the LA Olympics. This is part of his 3-year process as a human being. He wants to get through to the Olympics and he wants to play in LA. But if Melbourne United isn't willing to come to the table, then other teams around the league, from what I understand, they've already signaled that if they're hesitant, we might swoop in. So other teams are watching this situation very closely and wondering, in the same way that, Will McDowell-White, all these, if you can get a local Australian, you get an Australian point guard that just gives you flexibility across your roster, Delly is a big version of that.
So is the sticking point with Delly price, years, or both?
It's a mixture of both. Someone like Delly, he's obviously getting there in age. It's a tough thing to commit to. If you're a franchise, you're committing a lot of money, a lot of years to this guy. And again, you'd bet on, if you're going to bet on anyone, it's probably Delly to fulfill the requisite amount of impact over those years. But it's a legitimate conversation that a franchise has to have. Other teams around the league are sensing that United is maybe a little bit hesitant on it. So they're getting ready to maybe pounce on Delly.
Well, let's look at his numbers. Earlier this season, he was outstanding up until the FIBA break. Then he got injured. He had a couple of niggles. He went through a rough patch for about 6 weeks. He's starting to shoot the ball better now. He's been really good in the last 2 rounds. So I have confidence in his ability to perform as a player. I don't think the type of injuries he suffers are ones that you need to be worried about from a chronic perspective. Now, I could point out one team right away that could use him, and I think it'd be a perfect match.
Oh, go on then.
Brisbane. I think that was a really good match for him. Mitch Norton has been asked to do too much, and I don't want to get too much into the Brisbane stuff, but I think if you have a 1-2 point guard pairing of Dellavedova and Norton, you're really solid. And I think it's a good place. His best friend, Mitch Young, lives in Brisbane. It all matches.
It's interesting to talk about guys like Delly, where you've got other teams sitting there just waiting to see what happens. When free agency opens, if there's no extension done, okay, this is a chance. All of that you're getting is one thing with the guy we know he delivers on court, the competitiveness, all of that. But the leadership style for your franchise is another. For Brisbane, who need to make a crack at
They're
getting to the
desperate for something like that.
Something like that. And even
just a quality dude who's going to show up every day. He does everything right.
So that's enticing. Where the money side of it, you package all that into one. You're not just paying for whatever he's worth on the floor. There's so much more, but the leadership and helping build that culture or reshape that culture is going to be very enticing if it becomes a free agency. And the thing to keep an eye on with that is like Dash Daniels is signed for the next star as Melbourne United as well. So Dash Daniels, we'll talk about their contract situations. There's a mutual there for Flynn Cameron. So the other side, they've got this youth. A little bit of youth there, but they've got some older guys on the other side that I'm sure they'd like to even out at some point.
Yeah, the Delhi thing is interesting because at the end of the day, I think United will come to the table. I think they'll end up getting something done. From when we look at the teams around the league, if there's one team that I think it's tough to see guys leaving, it's Melbourne United, just because of their infrastructure and because of their culture. It's very tough to see. If you've been part of that ecosystem, it's very tough to leave it. But there are teams around the league who are looking at the situation and thinking, I wonder if we can do that. And then there are carry-on effects. If Matthew Dellavedova stays, then is there too much of a logjam in that backcourt for Flynn Cameron? There are a lot of teams around the league who are signalling that, hey, Flynn Cameron is someone we want to go after. So a lot of teams are watching the Delhi situation for a lot of different reasons.
My name to watch is with the Southeast Melbourne Phoenix, and it's Matt Hurt. They lost Mitch Creek at the end of last season. I guess you could be wondering, how do you replace a franchise player like Matt Hurt? He's a different player. He's a very, very good player, and that's an obvious statement. He's an all-NBL first-team caliber guy. And my personal belief is I think the Phoenix can win the whole thing. I think they are good enough to win the NBL championship this season, and if they do, it will be off the back of Matt Hurt playing out of his skin. This guy is exactly the sort of guy that the Southeast Melbourne Phoenix want and need long-term to play alongside.
How long do you lock him up for?
As long as you can.
20 years if you want.
The biggest.
This guy's a star.
I'll go to know some more, but from what I've heard, the Phoenix do obviously want to keep him. But as Corey used to always say, yesterday's price is not today's price. And that price has definitely gone up since he's arrived at the Phoenix. But also what that price tag now brings into play is Asia. Like that's going to be the big draw card for a big like him who can really come in and be a dominant scorer. You talk about Kendric Davis being unguardable. Matt Hurt's been unguardable for the majority of this season. All NBL first team caliber for sure, but you'd love to see him locked away for a long-term deal. If the Phoenix could do that, you can, again, we talked about Adelaide, you can build around that because you've already got this foundation piece who loves Australia. You'd always take a little bit less for loving Australia. He really does. He's talked about that. He's been open about it here. His family enjoying it here as well when they visited. But yeah, I think his price tag's going to really go up.
Well, let's talk about on court. This is a guy who shows the ability to play like a 3, but he has the body of a 4, but then he can also go down on the block and play like a 5. He's unorthodox. He has great finishing packages. He shoots the ball well in catch and shoot situations from outside the 3. And I mentioned it a few weeks ago. He's much better defensively than he gets credit for. It doesn't look orthodox and totally correct, but the guy's from Duke. He knows what to do on the defensive end. And again, I'm looking at a 3-year deal if I could offer it to Matt Hurt and show him, here's a sell. You have this right here. You can dance around the world if you want, but we're giving you stability in one of the best cities in the world to play basketball in. Let's not make no mistake.
The craziest thing about Matt Hurt is that he's 24. He is 10 days too old to win the Next Gen Award. He was born 10 days earlier.
He's overqualified for that award.
Absolutely. But the fact that he is only 10 days too old to win that award is crazy, right? So 24, theoretically, if he signs a 3-year deal, he's entering his prime at the end of that deal when we think about when guys enter their prime. So I know the Phoenix offered an extension in December. That's when they knew that we like this guy. They offered it to him then. He didn't take it just because in the middle of a season, let's see what happens here. And they will have interest in keeping him. He likes it in Southeast. But the sense I get is that he will explore the world market before he makes a decision on his future.
The enticing part, you mentioned the age. He's had the NBA experience a little bit with Memphis as well, but being 24 and understanding, okay, if we can get the 3-year deal done, you've got NBA outs in there, you've got other high-level outs in there, but this has been a place, you do this again at an even higher level, then that NBA team's going to come calling for you eventually. If that's your dream, that's your goal, which it is for him, this might be the best spot for you.
And then I wonder if other teams will go down this route. This has often been a risky route of getting guys who have never left America, getting them for their first sort of pro gig outside of that country. Kendric Davis has been a home run. Matt Hurt has been a home run. I wonder if teams maybe rethink going down this route as opposed to going to get, Euro veterans and things like that.
And the other reason I had him as my big name to watch is because if they get him locked away, and it's going to come at a price, then there are other decisions that can be made around that. But you can go to the table, you can do all of your recruiting, having your 5 and your 4 locked in. And I think in this league, that's a huge commodity.
It's massive. We always talk about the significance of local bigs, but the next most important thing is, can you find yourself an import big? And if you can, get your claws into them.
Can I throw just like a hypothetical out there?
You can do whatever you want.
This isn't reporting, but Matthew Dellavedova is based in Melbourne. They have Nathan Sobey. There's a mutual option there. I think over the past 6 or 7 or 8 weeks, probably feels like they'll take that, or he wants to return. I think they want to keep him. Are they a Delhi landing spot? Delhi, Sobey, Hurt.
Well, then
Geordie
you're saying
Hunter
goodbye
as a
to
bigger
Derek
role.
Walton Jr.
He feels like
You
a Josh
would.
King sort of guy, Matthew Dellavedova.
But they were a team that the Phoenix were a team that went after Will McDowell-White. Are they a team that goes after this local? He's a starter level point guard. Again, there are a lot of teams around the league who are going to try and chase Delhi, and whether he'll even be available is a question. But this is a team that's based in Melbourne. They have a facility that is a high level facility that you're not going to some random place that doesn't have a place where you can work out or whatever. I'm putting my hat on and thinking, like, where can these people slot in? There's an opening there, theoretically.
We'll chat that in the Phoenix as well. I think the facility, you can't understate that enough. In terms of just a little cherry on top that might sway some people, the names you're mentioning would.
So there are some of the names that we think are well and truly worth watching during this period. What we're about to do next, every single year on the marketplace, creates the most talk, the most hype, the most clicks, all that sort of stuff. These are the names to watch that are outside of the NBL right now. These are the names that we would love to see coming back to play here next season. The names that you can see on your screen right now are going to create a lot of conversation. There is some serious cattle on that graphic right now. And Olgun, I think the obvious one to start with is Duop Reith, because he has NBA obligations right now. Getting him back to the NBL would be incredible.
It's something that a lot of teams around the league are keeping an eye on. They know that Duop Reith really hasn't gotten an opportunity in Portland. He has played in the NBL before. He obviously likes it in Australia. There will be opportunities in China, across Asia, across other leagues. He can make a lot of money elsewhere. But NBL teams know the advantages of being in Australia, and the idea of potentially, swaying him to come back here. There are teams that are preparing offers for Duop Reith. Even if he might not listen, they're preparing as though he may consider it strongly.
It'd be fascinating. It'd be great to have him back. But the fact that he's had the taste of it as well, and where the league's probably grown to since he was last year, that might be enticing enough, because the money's one side of it, but this is a man who we would all sit here, and biased or not, but when he had his opportunities to play in the NBA, he took full advantage of them and showed that he belonged. But now when you've been sitting there for a little bit, you'd also be just itching to play. And this is a guy who's going to be a cornerstone of our program for the national level for some time going forward as well. To being able to play at a high level each and every year, even if the NBL season, whenever that finishes, if you want to go chase something for a little bit until you come back, wherever that may be, it'd be fun to see him back in the NBL.
Well, the contract extension has given him financial security, and that allows him to make choices based on what he wants to do as opposed to what he needs to do. And you start looking around at teams that could utilize a Duop Reith. Sydney Kings.
Every day of the week.
So you look at the Sydney Kings, and they'll be one of the teams. There'll be a lot of teams. They'll be one of them who makes a strong.
You know anyone in Sydney?
I've never been. And you got to look at the makeup of that team as well. It's Brian Goorjian, who picked Duop Reith in his first national team on a major scale. He's been on multiple national teams under Goorjian. Xavier Cooks is there. I don't know if there's a better big in world basketball outside of like Jokic, who is a better fit next to Xavier Cooks than the shooting and size that Duop Reith brings to the table. Again, this all comes down to whether Duop Reith wants to actually come back to Australia, and that is still an open question. But NBL teams are thinking that he might, so they're preparing their offers.
The name Yanni Wetzel, I reckon, would have made a lot of New Zealand fans stand up and go, hang on a second, what's happening here? I mean, he had such a great impact in the league when he was here. He would be a super fit for a lot of teams in this league.
He's someone who I know has signaled to people around him that he's not against a return to the NBL. And he's with Alba Berlin right now, playing with Will McDowell on that team. They're playing EuroLeague basketball. He's been sort of in and out of the starting lineup, but he's been a really effective player at that level. When we talk about the high-level local bigs in the NBL, we talk about Sam Froling, Isaac Humphries, Geordie Hunter, Tyrell Harrison, all of these guys, Keanu Pinder. Yanni Wetzel is in that group. And so if you're one of those teams out there that might be in the Sam Folling sweepstakes, you should probably get yourselves in the Yanni Wetzel sweepstakes too, because he very well could be available.
I've heard the same thing, especially in recent weeks, that Yanni Wetzel was open to potentially returning. And again, that is enticing where you've got these elite local bigs who all you have to do is hear that they're signalling an interest. But even in the Duop Reith's case, there might not be, but you still pick up the phone and say, hey, this is what we can offer you. This is what we can look at going forward. We know what you did last time. We know how much you enjoyed playing here and thrived. You've had your time now in Germany, albeit you're playing very well and you might be comfortable, but there's a chance if we can get you back, we'd love to have you. I've been hearing the same thing, and it'd be great to see him back in the league.
Well, I just think anytime we can get these bigs back, it's great. And, you know, we also talk about perhaps losing people, but I've been in this league forever. The league and the game continues to go on no matter what changes are made. There's so much talent locally that guys are always willing to come back because one guy leaves, presents an opportunity for another guy, and that's just kind of the way the league gets down.
We'll get to the Breakers next episode, but you look at Yanni Wetzel, we'll get to Parker Jackson-Cartwright in that episode as well. They've got Sam Menenga. They're going to get some fabric back in that place. That's a pretty good starting spot, getting Yanni Wetzel as your big.
They are consistently recruiting Kiwis. They want to fill their team with Kiwis. Now, not every Kiwi wants to go there, wants to return there. They're going to be a team that is in the Yanni Wetzel sweepstakes, in the Sam Wardenberg sweepstakes. Now, I don't know if either of those two would actually want to go there. You look at the way that the franchise has operated over the past year. Is that something you want to go into where they got Taco Fall in the middle of the season that sort of threw their whole season into haywire? Do you want to go somewhere that's a little bit more structured, maybe a bit more organised? That's a question. But New Zealand has consistently flagged, even now, that they want New Zealand talent, and they will go after it from the elite down to the DPs.
That's their move, I think, outside of Parker Jackson-Cartwright. The other name on that list to really highlight is Joe Luala-Chul. So, Pete, Joe's been gone. He's been gone for a little while now. I wonder whether he's at that age and stage of his life where he's had a look around. He spent some time in Asia and other leagues and got that type of money. But I wonder whether he's at the point now whether it's time to come home and finish his career in the NBL.
Well, when he came back recently and he talked about he didn't want to go anywhere else at the time being, and people were kind of linking him. Would he go back to Melbourne United, position there to really dominate back in the big man department? And he's still at an age where you talk about playing in your prime, what he could potentially be. And he'd be looking around at some of the big men and saying, okay, that's a matchup that I could really enjoy going against. And this is an MVP caliber level big man. We saw it when he was here, his growth through Melbourne United's program. So I'm sure that the NBL is always going to be his top of how enticing he is. It doesn't come cheap. We know that. But again, to get those high quality bigs, you have to pay the price. And I wonder if sooner rather than later we'll get him back.
From what I'm told, going into NBL 26, it's not likely that JLA returns, but the door is still open. It is not a foregone conclusion that he won't. I'd say right now, other options are probably a bit more enticing for him. There is a way to sway him over. But as of right now, I'd put it as less than 50%.
Let's hit quickly on a couple of other names on that list. Jack McVeigh, you can't walk past that name on the list. Where are things at with him?
So he's an interesting situation. He's enjoying his time in Houston and playing for Red Grand Valley as well. From what I understand, they like him as well. We all know Jack McVeigh. That kind of person around your franchise is a really helpful thing to have. From what I understand, he's not against staying another year there, even continuing in that sort of two-way in and out of the lineup. Like, he's enjoying his time there. They like him. I can see him staying there if he does choose to come back to the NBL. We have to remember Tasmania has his rights the next season. And so he can't play for another team. So if he's back in the NBL, it would be with Tasmania. But the sense I get is that Jack McVeigh will likely do that two-way dance for another season.
This time last year, Derek, we spent a lot of time talking about Will McDowell-White, and he broke all of our hearts at the end of the day. He went and played overseas. We love you, Will, by the way. We'll find out his status in a moment, but obviously there's a lot of teams that would use his services.
They are always looking for a good quality local point guard, and you know, we saw what happened when Cairns were able to put Taron Armstrong, a healthy Taron Armstrong, into the lineup, how it changes that. And Will McDowell-White is just the more experienced version, very dynamic. I think the experience that he's going through right now in Europe is going to make him a better player, Pete. But where's the match? I'm looking around. Where is the match?
I think you make the match work, but again, what he's produced right now in front of Europe eyes, I'm imagining Olgun's about to tell us that whatever his price was last year that kind of priced him out of the league, it might be even harder this year.
Yeah, I really don't like his price is going up rhetoric because it's largely not true. With Will McDowell-White, it's true. He's starting for Alba Berlin right now, playing really, really well in EuroLeague basketball. Had a really good game against Bayern Munich the other day. He is playing high-level basketball, so the price that he was being offered around the NBL last offseason, which was substantial, it's even higher than that. And so if teams want him, and there are a lot of teams that do want him and are prepared to chase him, it's going to cost a lot of money. Other teams around Europe are now starting to enter the picture because he's performing well over in Europe. And so whatever it cost last season to get Will McDowell, it's going to cost more than that. I don't see it happening, but he's not against a return.
Less likely than likely. Nick Kay, his name comes up every year around this time.
Yep. Nick Kay has signalled to teams that he's probably not come back this next season. So is the next name.
Why did you tell us to put him on the list?
because he is still someone that teams reach out to every season.
For what we just said before, though, okay, you've been there in your current situation. You've got that money. You've had that security now. Is this the year that you want to come back to the NBL? And again, we know he's got a young family, but the way he's playing over there and it coming in and
he signalled to every team that it won't be this coming season. So thanks, but not now.
We saw the names of Angus Brandt and Brock Modem. DJ Mitchell was also on that list. It's worth us highlighting Harry Froling as being part of that list, Olgun. You really wanted him on that list for a reason.
I was in Wollongong last week to watch a couple games in the Gong, and I saw Harry Froling. I had seen him a few months earlier in Mackay, and he'd put on a lot of weight just recovering from his head injury. He looks in really good shape.
Good.
He's in the process of getting back into the playing shape that he was the last time we saw him in the NBL. He'll more than likely be playing in the NBL 1 North this coming season. So he is someone who wants to get back in the NBL. He got cleared by his neurosurgeon to return to sport. So everything is trending in the right direction for Harry Froling. And when we look at these depth charts and the dearth of local backup bigs, Harry Froling is 6'11" and still highly skilled. He's been training with the Illawarra Hawks in stretches too. So everything is trending in the right direction for Harry Froling. I wonder if a team takes a stab at him next season.
That is a great story. Even just hearing that from where he's been is absolutely fantastic. So they're the names to watch. Let's start to dive in team by team, Pete Hooley. This is where you really come to the fore. And we start with the ladder-leading Illawarra Hawks.
Yeah, so you have a look at their depth chart, and again, who's under contract, who isn't. The key for me is, so Harvey, Olbrich, Hickey, Swakala, Bullock. I mean, they're the four. They've kept their core from last season. And that's why they've been so successful this season. That's a pretty good majority of that core to bring back, again, under Justin Tatum, the game style. So they're in a good position already to have that, knowing that Tyler Harvey's going to be an Aussie at some point in his next contract. But the key for me to make that core complete and then build around, add the other pieces you want, is the Sam Froling one.
No doubt.
That's the big name everybody's on right now is Sam Froling. We've seen at his best, he is a premier big man in this competition. Is it time for him maybe to say, you know what, I need a new challenge? Or is it, you know what, Illawarra Hawks have been so good to me, this is where I can see myself in my future?
Olgun, there were reports last week that Illawarra had lowballed, was the word used, Sam Froling. What can you tell us?
From what I understand, it was the sort of first offer in what's expected to be just a back and forth negotiation. So from everyone I've spoken to, it is a good faith negotiation that is currently happening. There's a sense that the front office of the Illawarra Hawks doesn't want to get players too bogged down in contract talks right now because they are playing really good basketball and are probably the favourites to win it all. So they don't want to create any sort of anxiety, consternation among the players. But the first offer wasn't close to what Sam Froling could earn in the market, and so we'll wait and see. It feels like that'll be a back and forth. The Hawks are confident that they will have the offer that will keep Sam Froling with their team. If he's in the NBL, they're confident that he'll stay with them. But there are other teams that are looking at the situation and thinking, I wonder if he's someone we can sway over. Because like you said, at his best, he is a high level big. And even at his worst, he is a really helpful, connective big that can still help you win games.
Well, his development has been very impressive. And I like the fact that with a very good offense, and they're the best offense in the competition, he's able to fit his way in a number of ways. He's good in the screening situations, dribble handoffs. What I like most is that he is directly at the front of the rim in all situations. He's a great offensive rebounder. He's low maintenance on the offensive end, low usage for his per. And I just think, Illawarra, that kind of sets the frame for how you start recruiting once you know which way you're going to go with Sam Froling.
Yes, I know there's some other teams that are interested and them having to sit back and now watch, because that's how it starts, right? You've got the teams that throughout this season, so Illawarra would be talking to him, talking to his agents, just saying, how can we get this done? And it's a very tough spot to be in. This is the landscape of professional basketball. You don't want to go too hard on these conversations and distract them, as Olgun said, they are the contenders, the leading contenders to win a championship. So the business side of it is, we've got 2 weeks then after whenever the championship series ends. If they go to 5 games and it's them, they've got to get it done before it hits free agency and becomes a free agent. So that makes it a little bit more difficult. Other teams would be sitting, watching, ready to swoop, and the business side of it never stops.
But one of the things also that's very difficult for the fan to understand is the different time frames that the club is on and that the player's on and that the agent's on. They don't always mesh. They don't always sync. And we saw that last year with the Geordie Hunter situation in Sydney. Geordie wanted a certain time frame, the Kings wanted another one, and it wasn't that either side was incorrect. They just didn't align, and then that led to the split of the two parties.
So if we contextualize this for everyone, and we don't talk numbers often, but let's do it. So
Love when you do.
The going rate for a starter level center, like a Froling, like a Humphreys, like a Geordie Hunter, is around 400 grand. That's like roughly what that guy earns. Now, the offer from Illawarra is just over half of that. So then they're not, the first offer wasn't close. Now, I have a sense that Illawarra could get to that number. Like, I think it'll be fine. That's not that ginormous of a number to get to for that level of player because, like we said, it's really important to have that local big lockdown. But that is the sort of number that a high-level local big can get. And then we also have to mention, like we do with everyone, and it is very much the case with Sam Froling, Japan is circling.
No doubt.
They see him. He played there last off-season. They know what he is. He's a known commodity there. Japanese teams are circling, and for all of these bigs that we look at, Geordie Hunter had an Asia out for a moment until he negotiated that out of his contract. Will Magne had one. Every Australian big or every Kiwi big is at a risk. We're at a risk of losing them to Asia in some capacity, and it's generally Japan, and they have their eyes on Sam Froling.
It's tough, and Jack, I mentioned it on Moments That Matter a couple episodes ago, and you have to be careful about how shrewd you are from the club's perspective with these offers because it can ignite a response in a player. And when does that show up? It may show up in the short term. It doesn't look like that's the case with Sam Froling. However, it could show up in 2 months' time when he feels some type of resentment because his agent told him this is the number that they hit you with initially.
Sam Froling has been with that organization for a long time. He's I think, and they see him as this. He's a smart, reasonable human being. He's not stupid. He understands. This is the first offer in what's probably going to be a long negotiation. From what I understand, these are good faith chats happening right now. There is no resentment from anybody.
That's the other side of it where you're Froling now. You just sit back and be like, I'm trying to win a championship this year. Those conversations, because I'm the way I'm playing and what I deserve, they're going to keep happening in the background. And the fact that they're all, he said, worst case scenario, I'd look at as a player, be like, I'm going to land on my feet somewhere. So let's just try and win a championship here. I love it here, but everything will take care of itself when the time is ready.
I know some players right now who have their agents negotiating extensions, and they've said, don't tell me. Don't tell me the number. Don't tell me anything, because if it's a low ball, I don't want any resentment to even creep into my brain. I think Sam Froling has some trust in himself that he's fine regardless, because he'll know, he knows he'll be fine no matter what happens. I know some players are just like, don't even clue me in. I don't want to know.
So this time last year, Melbourne United, Pete, were one of the teams that didn't have a lot of work to do. That when we put their in and outs up on the screen, they had a lot of guys locked in. It's the complete opposite this year.
It is. I mean, Chris Goulding, Tanner Krebs, the main two. It's not a bad place to start. Obviously, Chris Goulding's had an unbelievable season, all NBL season once again at his age, what he's continued to do. Delhi's the big one that Olgun flagged, what happens there. But the other two, the key ones, Flynn Cameron's one to watch as well, because Flynn Cameron just seems to be one guy who's deserving of more opportunity sooner rather than later. He saw when there was key injuries and outs for Melbourne when he had his career best weekend in the middle part, entered that kind of trust group from Dean Vickerman. And the other one is obvious, but that's Shaley. And you talk around the teams, you talk around every single club. Take Bryce Cotton, take the Xavier Cookses out of it, but who do you want on your team if you're going to go to battle to win a championship? 10 out of 10 teams want Shaley. It's what he does. He's unbelievable in that regard, and that's going to be a key one.
I think when it comes to impacting winning, Shaley's a top 10 player. And it doesn't always reflect in his statistics, but when you go and watch the video, when you see what he does around the floor in game, he's immensely valuable. But the Dellavedova piece is huge. And again, like I just said with Froling, where that goes is kind of going to determine how you shape out the rest of your recruiting process. And I think this is a fascinating time for Melbourne United.
Jack White's an interesting name, Olgun, in that he's come back to the league this year after being on the fringe of the NBA. Where is he now 12 months on? Is he still a fringe name within the NBA? Or is he the type of guy now that has to start to explore other overseas options and not just America?
So his priority is still to try to get back to the NBA. And so when we look at his player option, if he declines it, it would purely be because he sniffs an opportunity over there. An opportunity outside of the NBL would probably be the only thing that would stop him from opting into this player option. I don't see him, from what I understand, he wouldn't play for another NBL team.
Right.
So he's not going to opt out and sign with another NBL team. If he's in the NBL, he's with Melbourne United, and we speak about their infrastructure and culture. That is something that they've built, and so they can retain someone like that. If he opts out of it, it's somewhere else in the world, more than likely the NBA in some capacity. The Shea Ili one is interesting. From what I understand, there is strong mutual interest with regard to getting a deal done for him to return there. So he's someone who you could almost pencil in as a contracted player. It would surprise me in a ginormous way if he doesn't get a deal done to stay there, because the mutual interest is so strong.
So then, say hypothetically speaking, that's what I hear too. The Shea Ili's there, Chris Golding's there, Tanner Krebs. Dash Daniels is there. Now, Dash Daniels is not going to play 25, 30 minutes a game next year. Still incredibly young, a big project, no doubt, but what he can be, his ceiling is untapped. That's why he picked Melbourne United, which makes the Delhi watch and the Flynn Cameron watch very big going forward, because they are guys who can contribute high-level minutes and be highly productive for extended periods of time on any given team, which is going to have to be something to watch.
Derek, I know one of your other points about Melbourne is the Rob Lowe-Marcus Lee combination. It feels like they might be able to scratch their way through to the end of the season here with both of them, but is that sustainable next season?
Well, the first thought obviously is going to be JLA. And where does he fit in there? I think it would be a nice comeback story, but at the same time, I feel like JLA needs to look at another franchise, get away from Melbourne United. We've seen enough of it now. I don't think there's mutual growth should he decide to come back. But Melbourne United need to get stronger up front. I think it's where they're vulnerable right now. I don't think they have enough offensive firepower on a consistent basis up front. And at times, Rob Lee can provide some defensive liabilities that didn't exist with Haporti and JLA.
I could see it well with Rob Lowe. I mean, this is a guy who retired not too long ago, but came back in better shape, and he's having enjoyment right now. So you think about the makeup, and they would, again, we talk about this off the very top of the show. Clubs, when you're signing this year, you're then looking forward to next year of like, okay, well, Rob Lowe's been fantastic for us this year. Maybe next year we go and get a JLA type or that dynamic centre, and we have Rob Lowe as a backup big.
Sure.
And we're set.
Yep. Yeah.
We're set in that regard. Can Rob Lowe start games if we need? Absolutely. Can he also slide down to the 4? Can the other big, can they play together? Absolutely. I think that's something that they'd definitely look at.
So when we look at teams around the league who I think may prepare themselves to enter the Sam Froling sweepstakes, United is one that comes to mind immediately. I know he has a relationship with Dean Vickerman. He's played for Dean Vickerman in some of the Boomers games over the course of the past few years. So they're a team that wouldn't surprise me if they enter those sweepstakes. I think they should absolutely enter the Yanni Wetzel sweepstakes.
Yep.
To go get a high-level big and potentially have a Rob Lowe as a backup probably makes a bit more sense. And then when you look at the backcourt and the logjam that's potentially forming in there, if Delhi stays, which again is a complete possibility, then I don't think Flynn Cameron stays. I think there'll be too much interest around the league, and someone like Flynn, I think they can come and swoop on him. But if Delhi does stay, I wonder, do they use, and let's say Flynn Cameron's out, do they use the import spot somewhere else? Do they get more of a wing type? Do they, we've seen in the past, like not in the recent history, but you go back to, Rajon Tucker, you go back to Scotty Hopson, Casey Prather. Dean Vickerman has had some success with those wing type players. Maybe they opt for that sort of player instead of potentially Ian Clark. Maybe they go a different direction with their import.
The Tasmania JackJumpers, there is a bit of a sense now with 2 rounds to go. It is almost a little bit sad, and I say that respectfully, that it feels like the run's over. They're probably not going to make the playoffs or the play-in series. There are a lot of questions, as we can see now, about their future, Pete, and what that all looks like. I just wonder whether there's a bit of a mini reset coming here. Not a full reset for the JackJumpers, because they've got some guys under contract, but I wonder whether this team, in a lot of aspects, looks remarkably different to what it does right now.
Yeah, I mean, this season, the injuries have been decimated by the timing of. They went on that run in the middle of the season, 8 straight, whatever it was, and they look like the Tasmania JackJumpers who are going to defy the odds once again. But with losing these significant pieces, the Magnay injury, the McDonald injury at the time, Majuk Deng, 3 key guys when you've already kind of down on some key guys in form. So having Magnay, McDonald and Deng, those 3 locked away is a great starting point. Sean McDonald was supposed to start all season. Let's go back to the start of the year where he got injured in Singapore. Scott Roth's whole identity this year, I know they were waiting for Jack McVeigh, what could play out there was Sean McDonald starting and Jordan Crawford being a six-man punch, which is what he's been now. Going forward, that makes it interesting for the guys who are out of contract. I think it's one that you can't see Milton Doyle probably going too far if they have the mutual interest to keep him, because right now you still want to keep some sort of call going forward. I think Milton Doyle being a very low-maintenance guy, he just loves to play basketball. I know he's been up and down in form a little bit this year. The mutual option on Clint Steidel, I think that's a no-brainer, because you still need to have your leadership, the culture, the fabric of the club from day one. I think that if his role just has to decrease ever so slightly, whatever that is, what he will bring off the floor still to this culture is crucial going forward.
I'm bringing most of these Australian guys back. Kruzlovic, Steindl, Drimmick, Tarangi, probably, Gatz, all those guys I'm bringing back. The problem was not with the performance of your Australian players. The problem was your Australian players didn't have good health. The performance problems were with your imports, with Crawford and Doyle. Now, I'm sympathetic to those guys that were part of a historic championship run. I could live with one of them coming back. Now, you can talk me into either one of them.
Well, you tell us, if you had to choose.
If I'm choosing, I'm probably going to bring Doyle back, although I really dislike his inefficiencies, but I feel like there are some things that he does within the group that are conducive to winning. But I would understand if they didn't bring both of them back.
Well, it kind of signaled that with, coming off the bench for Jordan Crawford. Sean McDonald seems to be their point guard now for the considerable future, or at least the short term. So then it would signal more so that it would be a Doyle.
But when Sean McDonald goes through the health stuff, if you don't have Crawford, how do you construct your roster so that you have a viable backup option and somebody who's dynamic with the basketball? And that's where, you're going to have to go out and find somebody else. I don't know. Maybe you go get a Parker Jackson Cartwright and try and change the way this franchise has been constructed. Bring somebody in there who can take games over on his own at an efficiency level that Doyle and Crawford have not been able to do, but have shown the potential to do.
We've seen import guards over the past few seasons have some success coming off the bench, going all the way back to Barry Brown in New Zealand.
Yeah.
And we saw it with James Bateman this season. We saw it with Jordan Crawford this season. Even toward the end of last season, we saw glimpses of it. So when I look at what the Jack Jumpers have, I imagine a deal with Milton Doyle will get done. There is mutual interest there. They see him as part of the furniture. At this point, he sees Tassie as home. It surprised me if something doesn't get done there. And so when you look at a depth chart, I think they like Sean McDonald as a starter, Milton Doyle, and Will Magnate. You have three starters there. Then you could theoretically have import in the starting lineup, or you can I think they keep Anthony Drimmick. Anthony Drimmick can start. He started for their championship team. Import 4. Then you go get one of those impact backup import guards.
The 4's the big slot, isn't it? They lost Jack McVeigh late, and they weren't able to cover for that. But in this league, and history says it, you've got to have a really good 4-man to be successful.
You do, and we saw them go on that run where they won 8 in a row, and they didn't have Magnate through that run, but they had Majuk Deng playing at a high level. They had Sean McDonald for most of that run, and their demise occurred when they lost Deng, Magnate, and McDonald. I'm going to throw another one. We're talking about the point guard position. What about Dellavedova at Tasmania?
I'll get said of this. Probably every other team is you can find a way to fit it
culturally, and it seems like not a bad fit. Sean McDonald has the ability to play off the ball. Dellavedova often plays off the ball, but again, when you start talking about if Dellavedova is looking for a place where he could go in and impact championship prospects, Tasmania.
The 4-man, and I'll talk about it next with the team we're going to go to. There's a name that has an option that could suit down in Tassie.
Well, we'll get to that very shortly. The other on Tasmania is Scott Roth. We should talk about him as well and where things sit. Been a really challenging year in their championship defence. He's been thrown a whole bunch of crap sandwiches to eat at various stages during the season, and none of them have tasted good. And it's looked like the strain has really got to him. Is he coaching Tasmania next year, do we think?
I don't see a world where he's not. I still think the extension that he signed, I think 2 more seasons following this one, and then I think he flagged that he's probably done coaching beyond that. It still feels like he's still on that timeline and on that pathway to fulfill the remainder of this contract. The team likes him. There was some hiccups to start the season, but I think everyone sort of came together. The winning helped, but I don't see it. He's part of that fabric too.
The Brisbane Bullets, let's finish up with them on this episode. The remainder of the teams we'll get to next episode tomorrow. Tyrell Harrison's a pretty good starting point, Pete. Mitch Norton's there as well. And James Bateman's the interesting one that I think with his injury and the hamstring that many people have forgotten that it's a 2-year deal for him.
Yeah, and wasn't he fascinating since coming off the bench? I mean, the 51-point game, the way that he managed to really change the course of his entire season. At the start, there were so many people just saying that he's just not up to it. And again, having looked at everything they went to get him and what he was producing overseas, even through the first 10 rounds, as someone who watches a lot of games and guys overseas, that wasn't the James Bateman that I knew they were after. They were after James Bateman the year prior as well. They were very keen on getting him, but to have him locked in, to be able to hopefully get back to touching the form he was on is key. But now the big ones to come, and I spoke about it a few weeks ago. I mean, Casey Prather's the big one.
Yeah.
Casey Prather's the big one, and we know that him and his family love it here in Australia. We get to be a part of it with the broadcast crew. But a lot of it now is, okay, Casey Prather, he took this deal, and Olga will know more of the ins and outs, but he took this deal, he's about to be out of it, but it was the back end of last season, more so as a, hey, can we see you staying here, just showing glimpses in the back end of last year? You stay here, you chose to really grind in the off-season to get healthy, to get back to a point. Other than Casey and his family, he's far exceeded expectations anyone else would have had for him this year. This is an all-NBL first-team caliber guy, where he is putting up unbelievable numbers, over 20 points per game, 6 rebounds, shooting the 3 ball super efficiently, where half it is, okay, whatever contract he deserves now, well, he's one of the least paid imports this year. For good reason.
I think he's the lowest paid import in the NBL this season.
So, and again, people...
In the entire league.
In the entire league.
And he's third in the competition for points per game.
Easily the lowest paid import in the league.
But again, he understands that he's coming off 2 massive injuries where you've kind of got no choice. And he said, I've got to bet on myself to do that. But part of whatever he now deserves being one of the best players in the competition this year is a little bit, if you're Brisbane and trying to get that deal done, you've also, as much as he took the faith as well, you've kind of got to say, hey, what you did this year, here's a little bit back for that year as well, and pay the man what he's worth.
He is seeking a multi-year deal. He would like to stay in Brisbane. There is interest in that happening. They are deep in extension talks. But there are other teams around the NBL who are interested. There are teams in Europe, teams in Israel, teams in Puerto Rico, teams in Japan who are interested in Casey Prather. They're seeing what he's doing right now and they're thinking, interesting. Now, I think the sticking point is the amount of years and the money. And that's they're the two things that are worth looking at. But it's, do you trust Casey Prather over 2 seasons? He's had, let's say, a year and a half of healthy basketball. Is that still worth giving someone like him with his injury history 2 seasons? I think Brisbane has a multi-year offer on the table. I don't know if it meets the number yet for what Casey Prather wants. That seems to be the sticking point right now. But no, it can't be questioned the fact that he wants to stay. They want to keep him. Yeah. It's really just about some of those finer details. But those other teams circling is making it kind of interesting.
Well, if you look at his productivity this year, it is 5x expectation. There's no doubt.
More.
Yeah. There is no doubt. So going forward for this Bullets team to be successful, you don't need Casey Prather to be your one import like he has been this season. Okay? If he performs at 15, 16 points a game, continues the same level of efficiency, his 3-point shooting has been one of the greatest stories in the NBL this year. No one would have projected that Casey would be this type of 3-point shooter when you watched him play 5 years ago. But also, that speaks about who he is as a basketball character. He realized, I need to be better in this regard to ensure longevity in the league. Okay, so do you trust the 3-point shooting? If you trust the 3-point shooting, then it's most likely that he's going to be able to continue to perform at this level because he's strong in the upper body, he's smart. Now, on the defensive end is where a lot of people have been critical. I don't think that's as big a deal because you can build your defensive out around him with your team. And again, as a number 2 or a number 3 import, I think it's a great piece.
Well, you talk about that. That's the key thing to now watch, with James Bateman being there as well. So
James Bateman is the second year of his deal is in effect a team option. Let's keep that in mind. It's largely non-guaranteed. They wouldn't do that twice in a row after the Shannon Scott situation last year. So they can get off James Bateman's contract.
But there's no way they would want to get off of that contract. This is a guy who shot the ball at 50% from the 3.
But then you're looking at locking in Bateman and Prather. What happens to Kendric Cook? He's very close friends with James Bateman. Do they have enough with all 3 of them going?
So this is the thing, between Keandre Cook and Josh Bannon is the other big name here as well. Derek, you've seen a lot of Brisbane. Brisbane Brisbane have been in the league for a while now since they've returned to the NBL, and to be totally blunt, have been largely mediocre for most of it. By having Bateman, by having Prather, they need to land something big here, don't they? Aren't the Bullets at a stage now where they've got to go to market and land something that makes you go, wow?
Keandre Cook is a really good basketball player, but I'm not sure he's what Brisbane need. Brisbane need another guy who is really assertive and can go out there and, whether or not he's being successful in the game, still will himself, will his teammates along. And I'm not sure Cook has that intangible about him. Now, there are other teams in the league where I think he could be a really good basketball player. And his numbers have been fine this year for Brisbane. But given the nature of that import dynamic, Bateman's in, Prather's in. So how do we upgrade?
Well, if Bateman's
Bateman's got to be.
But if he's not, and you're trying to make an upgrade, then you're picking up the phone and what's Bryce Cotton's price?
Bryce Cotton's not going to Brisbane.
Bryce Cotton's not going to Brisbane.
But it is a great.
I think they would like to have him in Brisbane.
But I think there are some conversations from the Bullets, if I'm not wrong, about perhaps pursuing. I don't know. Maybe when the time comes, they may be interested.
In Bryce Cotton?
Yes.
Oh, like they'd be interested. I think it would be false hope though. I don't. Bryce Cotton's not going to Brisbane. They will continue. They will go and chase Will McDowell-White again. They will try and do that again. I don't know if he does that, but they'll be part of that. When you look at Bateman and Cook, they're not against those two returning. Like they're open to it, but there's also they have to do their due diligence with the market out there to see if they can get upgrades in those positions.
Let me say something though. If say Brisbane were able to bring Will McDowell-White in, then I will keep Cook.
Do you keep Bateman as well with the shooting?
I'm going with those four guys. Will McDowell-White, Bateman, Cook, Prather. You got Harrison, Bannon. Things start looking a lot different.
Well,
it's going to. Well, you know what, Ogie? You're not going to win by just trying to nickel and dime. That's not happening.
What about Josh Bannon? There's a player option there. What's the thinking?
It's worth keeping an eye on. Obviously, he's had some injury concerns over the course of the 2 seasons, so you wouldn't blame him for saying maybe now is not the time to test the open market. Maybe I should just opt in. But I think it's an option that I think is worth keeping an eye on. A lot of teams around the league are looking at that and thinking maybe that's gettable.
You can check it all out at nbl.com.au. Tomorrow on the show, episode 2, we'll talk about the remaining teams. Adelaide, Cairns, New Zealand, Sydney, Perth and Southeast Melbourne are all on the agenda. Great work by you guys. We will butter up and we will do it all again tomorrow. Thanks for watching us on The Marketplace.